Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's online panel of Singapore Perspectives 2023 entitled Work. My name is Robin. I'm a research fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies, and I'm your moderator this afternoon. The theme for this panel, panel 6, is addressing job vulnerabilities, ensuring viable and decent work for all. This morning, the keynote speech by Secretary General of NTUC, Mr. Ng Chee Meng, and the earlier panel highlighted the advance of technology and the transformation of businesses, bringing disruptions to the labour market. This has created new vulnerabilities among workers. Globally, wages of lower wage workers have deteriorated or stagnated. Associate Professor Irene Ng in the earlier panel highlighted the high income and inequality, high and low wage incidence, and the rise in the non-standard forms of employment in Singapore. The rise of the gig economy would mean that jobs have become more insecure for these workers, with many of them working without adequate protection or benefits. Indeed, the impact of technological advance in tandem with the pandemic recession has led to this double disruption for our workers, leading to displacement of traditional jobs. In Singapore, of concern are the mid-career workers, workers in small and medium-sized enterprises, blue-collar workers, and the non-professional white-collar workers. Panel 6 will pose the following questions. What are the job vulnerabilities faced by these workers and the ground realities experienced by them? How can stakeholders respond to these job vulnerabilities and ensure that workers can make a decent living for themselves and their families? On the note of working together, what can the different stakeholders, the government, the labour union, employers and businesses and workers, as well as communities, come together? These are some questions we hope to be able to address in the panel today. To do this, we are very privileged to have with us a wonderful panel of speakers. Let me briefly introduce them to you today. Our first speaker is Mr. Patrick Tay. He's the Assistant Secretary General of NTUC. He represents the labour movement in tripartite work groups, lobbying for changes to manpower-related laws and policies in Singapore. Our second speaker, Dr. Srija Nair, is Assistant Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Her research has covered issues such as climate change, food insecurity, water resource management, and more recently, digital transformation and workforce resilience. Finally, our third and last speaker for the panel, Ms. Ranganayaki Thengavelu, is the Deputy Executive Director at Beyond Social Services, a non-profit that is committed to engaging families living on low incomes and enabling the rental housing neighborhoods that they live in to become villages that support and raise their children well. How we're going to run this panel is that the speakers will be given 15 minutes each, and then after we will open up for the Q&A. To our online audience, please submit your questions for the speakers using the Q&A panel on the right side of your screen. We invite you to contribute to our discussions in a respectful and safe manner. A gentle reminder to all that this online panel is open for media coverage. With this, I will hand our time over to Mr. Patrick Tay. Mr. Tay, please.
Thanks, Robin, and a very good afternoon to everyone. I wanted to use this opportunity to thank the team, the organizing team, for having myself and the rest of us here, and a Happy New Year to everyone. And it's so appropriate. Last week, we heard Minister Chan Chun Sing as he kicked off the Singapore Perspectives 2023, talking about lifelong learning, continuing education and training, and how we can better support fellow Singaporeans, particularly the middle-aged, even mature ones, pivot and transform themselves and stay relevant and ready in this future of work. And so this afternoon, I thought before we kick off the real panel discussions and taking some of your Q&A, to share some insights and perspectives from the labour movement, myself, and addressing the job vulnerabilities of matured PMEs. You'll be wondering why this specific focus on matured PMEs. I think you probably heard SecGen NTUC, Brother Ng Chee Meng, mentioned this morning, as well as my colleague, Brother Desmond Chu, also mentioning about the role of unions, stakeholders, tripartite partners, and grappling with this future of work and this ever-changing and transforming environment, particularly we are operating in. And even as you can see in the last 2.5 years with COVID-19 pandemic and the real disruption, and in fact beyond disruption, really curveballs hurled at many of us. I think all segments of workers, be it the young, the not so young, local, foreign, even male or female workers are facing various sorts of challenges. But we have taken a particular focus on this segment, what we call the mature PMEs, the mature professionals, managers, and executives. Why then did we focus on this segment? I think this segment, yes, we have lower wage workers as well as other more vulnerable segments. But even prior to COVID-19, if you look at the manpower statistics and the labor market reports, this segment are particularly vulnerable. Those in the 40s to 60s, well, particularly exacerbated by the fact that we have an aging population, so a bigger group will fall into this category. And also the fact that, say all you want, as we embark on this entire journey of the PME task force, which I'll touch a bit on shortly, is that they too face various challenges and issues when finding work, or staying in work and staying employable. So this segment is of one which is of particular importance, even prior to COVID. But even during COVID itself, we also saw many of them, curveballs thrown at them in more ways than one, whether they are in full-time employment, part-time employment, even in freelance arrangements, having to grapple with to pivot into new sectors, new industries, and really trying new careers. So this is with the backdrop of ever-changing and ever-evolving new skills in demand. So I think there's a lot of exacting demands in more ways than one on this particular segment, whom we call the mature professionals, managers, and executives. And that's why the impetus for the labor movement to partner the Singapore National Employers Federation in the thick of our COVID-19 pandemic to set up the PME task force. It's a joint task force between NTUC and SNEF. First of its kind, first time we have done this in a very formalized manner without the government involvement. And both of us actually, together with Brother Sim Kim Guan, whom you would have heard from in earlier panels, and myself co-chairing this PME task force with a team of task force members. And we actually took a great effort and through a 1 year period, a 1 year journey, to engage more than 10,000 local professional managers and executives, different ages, different segments, different gender, and in different industries and sectors of the economy. And through that, we got a better idea, and not beyond just a dipstick, because 10,000 is no mean feat. I mean, we really heard the feedback from the ground. It wasn't an easy journey because with COVID and all the restrictions, we could do 14, 15 focus group sessions, but those were in a very safe management format, and we did a lot of online and offline engagements as well. So I think I wanted to use this opportunity to share some of the findings from that, if I may have the next slide. And one key thing that came out of it is that many of these mature PMEs, whom I mentioned, are in the ages of 40 to 60 years old. I think this segment is particularly vulnerable. They fear, in two big areas. Firstly, job security, whether it's employment, and as well as employability, whether if they lose a job or even if they stay in the current job and the job is being disrupted, like what we see in some industries, whether they can bounce back and be rehired or re-enter into the workforce. So these are two major challenges which they face. And of course, picking up training, no easy feat. Myself also trying in the last couple of years, undergoing some, using my Skills Future credit to take on some of these Skills Future training courses. It's not easy. Some come with exams and tests, and mind you, at this age, it's not that easy to really learn something totally new. So I think these are some of the fears, anxieties that many of our PMEs, particularly the mature ones, face. Next slide. And because of our survey across 10,000 PMEs, we actually covered the different segments and also different ages as well. And you may want to take cognizance of the fact that not just mature PMEs, but younger PMEs themselves realize that things are being disrupted. Skills are, the skills in demand are changing so rapidly. So therefore, amongst the younger PMEs, we also realize that information asymmetry, i.e. where the skills in demand, the jobs in demand, are areas which concern them quite a bit. And for the mature PMEs, whether they can continue to stay in employment and of course stay employable is always top of their minds. Like I said, this entire survey is done in the midst of COVID pandemic, and therefore I would say pretty contemporaneous to really resonate and echo the fears and anxieties. And of course PMEs in certain sectors, for example like the ICT and financial sector, Of course, this is prior to the slew of layoffs that we saw in the tech sector in the last 6 months. This was done prior to that, but many of them also worry about whether there's a level playing field for them, which with a very large foreign workforce in these professional services sector. Next slide. And of course, some of the key insights, the more mature, the older PMEs actually comparatively with the younger ones are less confident really about their career opportunities, and they attribute that to their age. And one of the key takeaways from this entire PME task force survey is they feel that ageism, there's still some form of ageism that's happening, and therefore there's concern and worries and fears over this particular aspect. Next slide. Yes, here we are, some of the key insights from the PME engagements, and yes, mature PMEs generally felt that they were more vulnerable and face various challenges. Like I said, level playing field, workplace fairness, as well as ageism. Some of these actually are quite top their minds. And post this entire PME task force, journey, we actually fleshed out a list of 9 key recommendations from this report, which I will highlight shortly. Next slide. Yes, this is further what are the areas that help dovetail our key 9 recommendations, which I'll share shortly. I think some of these are about creating a more fairer level playing field in the workplace to ensure job security, and at the same time also employability of our mature PMEs in particular. And many of them felt that there are more ways and different kinds of supports that can make their journey, particularly the lifelong journey as well as the lifelong learning journey, a more smoother and successful one. Next slide. These are the 9 recommendations with 4 key trusts. Essentially, this deck, or should I say this entire report, is available either if you're connected with me by LinkedIn or through the various platforms. You can do a search on it. It's readily available, and you can read through the entire deck of all the various surveys that we have done in that journey, in that 1-year journey, as well as some of the key outcomes from the focus groups. At the same time, the 9 recommendations. But I thought to mention specifically, this 9 recommendations were fleshed out sometime late 2021. And I mean, first time I'm sharing, but just end 2022, just a couple of weeks ago, Minister of Manpower has actually sent a formal reply to the Labour Movement as well as SNEF, i.e. Brother Sim Kim Guan and myself, on this entire deck recommendations. And as you can see, looking at these 9 recommendations, almost I would say 8 out of 9 recommendations have in a way been rolled out in various forms. For example, the formation of Tripartite Committee on Workplace Fairness, which is deliberating on a proposed workplace fairness piece of legislation that you'll hear more this year. At the same time, also other areas, for example, like Compass, where we try to level the playing field for local PMEs, as well as other important areas to support mature workers, particularly mature PMEs in their continuing education and training, career coaching, as well as their upskilling journey. And one very, very important point I would like to mention in these recommendations is our lobbying for unemployment support for PMEs who are displaced. I think this is one area which stood out quite a bit from our engagements. It's been fleshed out in recommendations, and it's something which MOM or Minister of Manpower has replied that they are looking at it. I mean, you heard some snippets of it when he launched the Empower Pillar, and he did mention specifically that they are looking at it, exploring it from a long-term basis. Next slide. And post PME task force recommendations that we have fleshed out, we also use this opportunity to double click on some of the key things through this launch of the Every Worker Matters conversations. You probably hear this 4 key letters EWMC happening, or hashtag EWMC happening on social media as well as on other platforms. And we've been on this journey. Brother Desmond Chu, whom you heard earlier in the earlier panel, as well as myself, are co-chairing and supporting this journey. Is a year-long journey which started in August last year, and we will probably hear iterations of this as we look at what the new worker compact is. And beyond professional management executives, there's of course the youth as well. That's why we have the youth task force as well. And of course, other segments. So we've been consulting widely and engaging widely through focus groups as well as other platforms to the tune of more than 10,000 already. And we are still pressing on in the coming weeks and trying to hear from the ground and really develop a deck of ideas and recommendations to forge the new worker compact, be it between workers, different segments of workers, different types of workers, and of course in the new workforce and workplace. Next slide. And these are just some of the pictures of our engagements in the last 5 months. And yes, we have been consulting widely and also double-clicking on this matured PME segment. We just wanted to, post-COVID, or should I say post-recovery, trying to double-click with our matured PMEs to hear from them whether such fears and anxieties as splashed out in the PME task force recommendations are still relevant and are still top of their minds. And last slide. Yes, so in conclusion, I would say, the anxieties, concerns, and aspirations of our local PMEs must not be ignored, as reflected in our joint NTUC-SNEF PME Task Force report. And as a society, we value fairness and equal opportunities for all workers, which is why NTUC and SNEF, as I shared earlier, are working closely with the government and employers to ensure we have a level playing field for our local PMEs. And when our PMEs feel supported and valued, they are more likely to be motivated and productive, and are leading to win-win outcomes for both businesses and workforce. And we further recognize that the mature PMEs, particularly those in their 40s to 60s, continue to face risks in terms of job displacement and challenges in re-entering the workforce when they have been laid off. Yeah, as you can see from the tech sector in the last couple of months, we need to really give them a greater assurance and assistance with some form of unemployment support. So we'll continue to lobby in that front. And in the next few decades, Singapore will experience significant demographic shifts with our aging population. And thus, we must ensure that our mature PMEs are not left behind as our economy transforms. So on that note, we will continue in that journey to champion for our mature PMEs to ensure they are not left behind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick Tay, for your presentation. I think what stood out for me was that when you highlighted the job vulnerabilities of the PMEs, their fears and anxieties about job insecurity, and about their skills becoming replaceable and irrelevant. Right. So on this note, I think it's timely that we dive further into this topic. We have Dr. Shrija Nair, who will share findings from a recent study on challenges faced by mid-career trainees when it comes to reskilling and upskilling. Over to you, Dr. Nair.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you to IPS for inviting me to share this research. And it's an honor to be sharing the panel with Mr. Patrick and Ms. Ranga as well. So what I'm going to share today is part of a larger collaborative project which came to a close last year. It was funded by the Singapore Social Science Research Council, and we had several facets in this project which looked at how digital transformations are going to impact workforce and workplace. One of the components of this project which I was looking at was on what are the policy aspects of how can policymakers support those who are undergoing these transformations and the specific sectors which are undergoing these transformations. One of the tools which policymakers can employ is that of skills training, so reskilling, upskilling. And we were looking at, we wanted to study one particular program which came around during the COVID period, which was this SG United Skills Program. Next slide, please. So a review of the literature around skills training reveals that much of the evaluations of skills training, they're often limited to just getting feedback from the trainee at the end of the program and looking at whether they found a job or not, not giving enough, there's not much chance for the trainee to actually reflect on their journey of undertaking this skills training or a reskilling or upskilling effort. And that really motivated us to deep dive into what do trainees really think when they come into these programs, and what are their profiles, what have they done before they come to these trainings, and what is their journey like during the training. Another knowledge gap is that the training profiles are often, it's difficult to kind of match a perfect training program to the profile of the trainee. And this is an ongoing challenge. So with that, our objectives were really to assess what is the experience of a trainee coming into a particular training program, how does that link with the attitudes towards learning and training in general that they have, and what are the job outcomes of after they undertake a skills training program. And the idea was to inform the future iterations of skills training programs in Singapore. Next slide, please. So the case in focus here is the SG United Skills Program, which was a reskilling upskilling program, which came about during the COVID year. They offered 6 to 12 months of courses, which were certifiable by CET centers, including institutes of higher learning. It had several unique features. For example, it was offered progressively. So they were continuing these IHLs, private training providers and unions, they were continuing to provide training in cohorts. So throughout the year, they would have different times of intakes and different exits period. It was offered in a modular format, understanding that people are looking for jobs. It was for job seekers. They are looking for jobs, so they need this flexibility to exit. If they find a job, they have the flexibility to exit. But you will still go with a certification of some sorts, even if you do a 1 month or a 2 month. So that was a very unique feature of this program. This course fee, of course, was subsidized and offered by Skills Future, and you could use your Skills Future credit as well for this. Another feature which was unique for this particular program was that there was a monthly training allowance of 1,200 Singapore dollars, which many trainees kind of spoke about a lot, that how much it helped them during this COVID period to not really think twice before jumping into a training program. Now, as of April 2022, this SGUS has transformed into a career transition program. It's a train and place program. Now, the focus of this SGUS was on sectors of high labor demand and growth potential. So there were a number of trainings courses being offered, ranging from 6 months to 9 months to 12 months. We deep dived into 2 institutes of higher learning and interviewed trainees who came into this program. And next slide, please. So what we did was, at the end of 2021, we conducted 1 hour long interviews. This was, the trainees had to opt in to take these, to participate in this interview from 2 IHLs. And the pictures here give an idea of, are really to give an idea of what a typical training program would look like. So you could have a training for 1 month, and if you exit, you can still get a professional certificate in human and managerial literacy. So it was a modular format for all these trainings, and the range of courses offered was huge, from advanced manufacturing to fintech to infocom and media, digital HR, digital marketing. And so we conducted a 1 hour long interview. We interviewed 39 trainees who came into these training programs. And what we asked them was it was a semi-structured interview. We asked them to share with us what their background is, education, what kind of career trajectory do they have, why did they enroll in this training program, how their experience has been, their ideas of skills training landscape in Singapore as such, what are some job outcomes that, these interviews were conducted towards the end of the training program. So when we contacted these 2 IHLs, we looked at trainees who are about to finish or had completed the training program. So we could ask them about the job outcomes. And next slide, please. So now I'd like to share, now we had several insights from the project, but for the presentation today, I'll specifically want to focus into insights from mid-career training trainees. And I'd like to echo some of the thoughts which Mr. Patrick presented earlier, that the mid-career trainees, this group is specifically quite different. They are juggling multiple personal and professional roles. and the stage of their career that they are in. They have unique vulnerabilities, which makes it particularly difficult for them to make these transitions. So these quotes are from the trainees, and we did a thematic analysis of what was coming out from what the trainees say in terms of their experience of undergoing this particular training. Now, one of the key themes which came out was you're dealing with a moving scale when you're talking of skills training. If you're not placed into a job immediately, you lose the opportunity to really practice what you've learned. So with this new form of the SGUS, which is the Career Transition Program, we believe that this should be able to address this issue of giving the opportunity for the trainee to actually practice what they learn immediately after the training program. Another concern was that when things are changing so rapidly, how many of us would be doing the same thing that we are getting this training for? So a little bit of skepticism around that, I'm training for something, but it could become obsolete very, very soon. So where does it end? Or is it a constant moving scale that I'm dealing with? There were others who appreciated the flexibility of training of this kind with a modular format, people who are deciding which, do they do a career switch or which career path to actually do. There were also those who said, what do I do next? Is there an advanced course of this, or where should I go? There were others people who've been in a particular sector or industry for 20 years and now making a transition. For them, a single training, there was a bit of a lack of confidence in the sense that, is this training enough? What if my employer asks me to do some big analysis based on me having undertaken this training program? I don't feel confident. Maybe I can do an internship with them beforehand. So these were some of the skepticisms around what is this continuity in skills training? Can you get better and better at skills, and how so? Time constraints, of course, this particular age group, mid-career trainees who are in this stage in their career, they are juggling between full-time work. Many times they would have issues, even if they're employed, can they get time off for training? And if they are working, of course, they have to see how it fits with their work commitments. Next slide, please. This one came out very, many trainees brought this up, that training alone is not enough. So we asked them this question: between skills and qualifications, what do they think is more important? How should the hiring be done? So many of them said that I may have the skills, but how do I demonstrate it? It's still my networks which get me the job most of the time. Or if I have to hire somebody, it will be based on me knowing them personally or knowing that they do a good job. So is the training alone enough to actually get the job? So you might do a tech course, but you're still unable to get a tech job. So the actually getting the job probably requires other types of skills like networking, and do you know somebody from your previous work experience? Are there people who value the kind of other skills that you bring, even if you're switching sector or industry? So this was a concern, that is a training enough? Ageism concerns, there were not many, but there were few who did bring. And here is where the employer kind of comes into the picture. So people are doing this training, but does the employer kind of value the kind of credentials that this kind of training brings in? Or is there a preference for, say, younger people for certain types of jobs? So there was some who mentioned this concern that really everybody has to come on board. And that's when it really will make a difference. And training allowance, of course, was mentioned many times, that it's if there was no training allowance, there was no subsidy, then you must think, do you really want to make an investment in paying for a training program? And the next slide, please. This is the last slide where I kind of summarize that what does it imply for policy design? So I'm someone who's looking at what does it mean for a policymaker in designing a skills training program, because it is indeed very hard to design a training program which will cater to every type of trainee. But how best can we reduce that mismatch, and how best can we kind of bring a trainee very close to kind of a very perfect training program designed customized to them. So first thing to realize is there is a complex relationship between skills training and the skills training by itself leading to, say, better job, better pay, better position, or a new sector. And it's really an ecosystem with many variables that we are talking about. So it requires a trainee with a positive attitude, employers with an open attitude, education which is recognized, and training agencies which is recognized, and governments to provide the support. So there are many variables. So it's important for us as researchers to even understand that there is this complex relationship. The second takeaway is really that some profiles of workers, each worker is different. Some profiles require more assistance and targeted support. So identifying what is it that makes it difficult for them to enroll into a training, sustain in the training, and then get a better career outcome after the training. So where is it that, there, like in this, in interviews, we have not actually spoken to people who dropped out in between, for example. So why did they drop out? Where are they actually? Who are those who are constantly falling through the cracks? So some profile of workers would require that extra assistance to bring them on board and make them part of this learning journey. And my final point, and I think it's very important that when we think of career transitions, we don't think of single training programs, but pathways. So pathways which help trainees to move between formal education or vocational training to employment. And if they want to come back, so like in Europe, there are countries where there are several career pathways. So what a trainee has done before the training and what they want to do later. Are there clear pathways which are very logical and easy to understand for the trainee, that if I take this particular training, this is what I'm looking at next. This is how it links to what I've done before. And of course, it's influenced by how a successful training is perceived and how a successful career transition is measured. Is it by position? Is it by moving into a industry of your choice? Skills training can mean different things to different trainees. So I'll end there, and I'll be happy to take any questions later. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Srija, for the presentation. Indeed, your findings suggest that reskilling and upskilling, alone may not be enough, to lead to increased workers' employability and also to improve their career prospects. Indeed, the reality is more complex than that. Perhaps during the Q&A, we will revisit this point that you have raised from your findings. Moving on, we are going to focus on a different group of vulnerable workers. Ms. Ranga from Beyond Social Services will share on the challenges faced by lower wage workers and their families. And on the note of working together, what does collaboration, cooperation, and inclusion look like? Over to you, Ms. Ranga.
Thank you, Robin. Very happy to be on this panel with the rest of the distinguished speakers here. I'm glad to be here as representing the non-profit sector, actually, because I think when we look at all the studies and the research that has been put out, it sheds light on the overall problem. And I'm really here to look at the human face of lower income earners and bring them into this conversation. So slide 1, please. The study on in-work poverty in 2020, which Professor Irene Ng would have shared earlier, shows that low-educated young workers are disadvantaged by their age, low education, and they also face lower psychological well-being in comparison to the Singapore Mental Health Study, and lower quality of job conditions than those found in the Eurofund study of 2017. I wanted to actually touch on this second point of low education. The average earnings of respondents with ITE qualifications was no different from that of respondents with secondary and below qualifications. And when I saw this particular finding, many faces popped into my mind of very enthusiastic young people in the communities that I work in who have so many skill sets and strengths, and the only way they can pursue their education is through ITE. And when they make it through ITE, they have actually achieved a level of education which is different from their parents. And yet when they come out into the job market, what they are faced with is very lower level choices. So if we look at what is actually the option for them, it's actually as delivery riders and so on, which is very similar to if you didn't study at all. So that actually puts a focus on how do we allow that education pathways to lead to good employment for those who are better skilled. Slide 2, please. So the nature of low income, I mean, I think all of us would have heard about these various different issues that lower income respondents or workers face. There's definitely lower education, lower salaries, and people have to take on multiple jobs to make ends meet. And this third point, which is less social capital, means that they're always in the same group of people who are in similar situations like them. So the opportunity to make contact with those who can lead them on to better opportunities, better jobs may not quite be there. Of course, there is the family issues, and lack of space is the other. Living in rental or 3-room flats makes it very, physical space is limited, and emotional space and mental space is also limited. And when we talk about training, I think Dr. Srija shared a lot about the training pathways, for lower income workers as well as everybody else. And I find that often the people that I work with find it very difficult to continue attending training, committing to training, and keeping up is a real challenge because of these various factors that we are facing. And then there comes the employers, right? So employers have to ensure that the work is done. And it is often difficult for them to accept the life challenges that lower income employees experience. And employers sometimes are not aware of the lived experiences of the low income. So we've heard of many stories where traveling to work alone is an hour and a half by public transport, and people leave their homes as early as 6 a.m. to be able to make it to a shift that starts at 7:30 a.m. And at their job level, it is hard to have flexible work arrangements or work from home, which was the case during COVID-19. So even as I share this long list of issues that lower income workers face, I think one of the things that we have to be really very aware of is the intersectionality of these vulnerabilities. It is not only circular, it's somewhat of a spiral. So if you visualize a downward spiral, and how do we catch, where do we catch it? And how do we actually allow this spiral to maybe move upwards? At which point does the intervention take place so that people feel more uplifted and want to be able and feel that they're swimming back up is one of the things that comes to mind. So when we look at all these vulnerabilities, the impact is definitely psychological, physical, as well as social. So here I will touch a little bit more on the social component later on in my sharing. So psychologically, the self-image, I'm not good enough, I try very hard, but I can never make it. And this starts from a very young age. So there are teenagers who tell us that they have no hope and they're still studying. They haven't even come to a point where they can choose a career. Then physical, the poverty of sleep, food, and money lead to poor health. So poverty here is not just about low income, but it's also of not having enough sleep, always having this concern about is there enough food to put on the table. And the last is reduced social participation, leading to isolation. So if you're working multiple jobs, or even if you're not completely working, you don't have that sense of self-image that you can contribute to society. So these are some of the descriptions that I'd like to share about low income or low age work, low income earners. Next slide, please. So when we look at what can change, so structurally things need to change. And at the same time, intrinsically, people need to be nurtured and included. So we're looking, I would like us to explore a model where when one boat rises, all boats rise. So there are different things that each of as stakeholders we can do. And people in the center is very important. Putting these people in the center of our solutioning is very important. And I know there's a tripartite model, and I'm suggesting that the community, civil society as a partner in supporting the growth of those from low income so they can be contributing members of our society. I'll share some examples of current initiatives that is actually looking at civil society participation in ensuring workers can contribute better in their jobs. Next slide, please. So if we look at what can government do? So when we're looking at government is social protection, I was very happy to hear Patrick share about the unemployment support for PMEs. So there's a social protection part of government, which is social insurance, social assistance, and labor market programs. And a decent living comes with decent wage. So the progressive wage model that is being rolled out is raising salaries to a livable wage benchmark. So that is what government's role then is. When it comes to the employers and businesses, I've been speaking to the Singapore Business Federation Foundation, and two of the programs that they have rolled out is very encouraging in allowing employers to be able to see the difficulties that employees face and how can we bring them together to be able to understand each other better. So as part of the Empower Circles, the business community who hires and the social service agencies who support and nurture people in transition from challenging circumstances come together to look at how best to support them. And the Employability Fund, once again, also works with civil society actors, nonprofits, to outreach to different population groups, starting with the rough sleepers and homeless, and the long-term unemployed parents and caregivers of at-risk children. And now this is expanding to those with mental health conditions and out-of-school youths and caregivers. So SBFF, with its initiatives to bring various partners together, is very encouraging. Next slide. Here, I will actually touch a little bit on, again, a civil society initiative, Work Well Leaders. It's a non-profit collective of CEOs and leaders, and they champion workplace mental health and well-being as a strategic priority and board agenda. So not just a HR responsibility. So it is intended as a community of practice for leaders so that employee mental well-being becomes foremost for employers. And this doesn't only focus on low-income employees. It is actually looking at everyone in the organization so that there's better awareness for mental health. Next slide, please. So this is where I light up even more, which is beyond social services where I work. And I think the focus has always been on being able to look at the strengths and the abilities of our members in rental housing that we work with, right? So it's about, from a very young age, creating spaces for community participation. So I wanted to highlight 3 such programs that we have. And this is just an example, which could perhaps, we can share more about outside of this conference. So Family Circles was one that came up during COVID, right after COVID-19 hit. And, a year after that, Family Circles was of members who came together to look at how to improve their lives. So they come together as a circle and they share on a regular basis on what are they working on, what are their aspirations. So it's giving them a space to be able to act, to be able to share ideas, to be able to support each other. The community enablers and community fellows are actually people living in the rental blocks who have a lot of strengths purely because they've lived through a lot of challenges. And they also have acquired various skills through their life. And we work with them together such that they're able to coordinate and do projects within their own communities. So the members bring their strengths and also acquire skills through this community participation. And what this then does is it translates this resilience to the workplace. So, our work, our life, our families are not as separate as we think it is. When something changes in one part of our lives, it impacts everything else. So when we acknowledge the natural leaders in the community, they become part of something bigger. It expands their networks. They get to meet volunteers who are coming through CSR activities in corporates. They meet with tertiary students who come there to perhaps teach younger children. And then they get motivated and have more hope for themselves and their children. So if you look at this, it's happening at all the levels, from the children to the youth to the parents. They are connecting with more social capital as they participate in their own communities, and they're also recognizing their inherent strengths. So the next slide is just an example of how the impact has been for 2 women that we have worked very closely with. So this is a mother of 6, aged 33. She's active in a mother's circle that is engaging neighbors towards building a safe neighborhood for their children. And she says, I realized that I still have the capacity to learn new skills. I learned to interact with people from different backgrounds. I earned the trust of neighbors, and in turn, they took me seriously when I talked about sexual harassment in my neighborhood. I managed to talk to neighbors who I rarely talk to, especially the youth. So this is a mother who initially felt that she was somewhat in a situation that she cannot do much about, and now she feels very empowered. Another mother, a mother of 3, age 42, community enabler for a community matched savings program. So this is a matched savings program where people save, and then this is matched by the child development account that every child has, and matched by donors and then matched by the CDA. And she says, I got to meet and know many neighbors, especially mothers in the community. I have become more open-minded and brave, and I'm genuinely happy to help other mothers. Parents who are unable to attend due to work will contact me to help them by putting money for their children first on collection day. I'm proud to help this community to grow their children's savings. So if you just read these two accounts, it already clearly shows how much pride people take in the things that they can do and help contribute. Next slide, please. So basically, my entire sharing is summed up by this quote by Mr. Ravi Menon, MD of MAS, when he spoke at the launch of the Singapore Synthesis Innovation, Inclusion, Inspiration. Inclusion is what we are looking at. So we're really working through that cycle of community plus the labor movement plus the government and employers. We are really looking at a model where we can have more people contribute actively to our society. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all speakers. Now we'll commence the Q&A segment. You may type in your questions using the Q&A function on the right side of your screen. Okay, as I look at another screen for the questions that are coming in, all right, one member of the audience highlighted that in this fast-changing economic environment, the skills landscape is evolving at a relentless rate. Indeed, Dr. Shrija Naya shared on the perspectives of mature, midlife, and mid-career trainees, a perspective that we don't often hear enough. There are challenges when it comes to reskilling, upskilling, and lifelong learning. Similarly, this is a group that Mr. Patrick Tay has highlighted in his earlier presentation about the PME's worries about not find another job that could match their current skill sets, and also the anxieties about their skills becoming irrelevant in this fast-changing landscape. And the earlier panel, Associate Professor Irene Ng highlighted that unequal training participation rates, whereby workers with university qualifications and above attending more training compared to workers with technical and other qualifications. Clearly, reskilling, upskilling, and lifelong learning alone may not be enough to enhance workers' employability and to improve their career prospects. All right, so on this note, do the speakers have a response to how the different stakeholders can work together for this skills ecosystem to enhance employability and career prospect for workers?
Yeah, maybe I'll give a go at this for a start. I think as we embarked on the Skills Future initiative and the various funding in the last many years. I think we have gone beyond the traditional employer-supported training system to individual-initiated training. I think that's also, in a way, helped us, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, to support and better, encourage and catalyze training among, for example, freelancers and freelance professionals, because they are traditionally not in an employment relationship, but it now, because of the individual initiated training framework and funding framework, can therefore tap on national funding to upskill and upgrade themselves. But I think what I can say is that, I can't agree more with Irene in her sharing, that because in the labor movement in NTUC, the strategy team together with many of our IHL partners have also done quite deep research in this space. And I think one of the key takeaways is that the people who are more enlightened, more proactive, with a more active spirit in the learning space, tend to be those who are more high potential, tend to be those who have a growth mindset, and tend to embrace training more. So yeah, I think to a large extent, that's quite right. That perhaps even employers themselves usually fund training of those who are, where they exhibit potential or have chances of moving up or taking bigger job responsibilities. So therefore, I think to level up, I think the labor movement, besides forming our company training committees, is working very closely with the employers as well as our tripartite partners, because I think it's not just the individual play an important role through individual initiated training, But I think the employer increasingly will play a bigger role because those who are in an employment relationship, we cannot leave anyone behind. I think we talk about vulnerable workers and the vulnerabilities of all segments of our workers. And therefore, I think there's a pressing need, an imperative to look out for everyone, to ensure that everyone moves along and pick up the skills, because the skills disruption, the curveballs are not just going to affect the upper half, but everyone in the workforce. So no one is spared, no one should be left behind. And I think a greater emphasis on the role of employers. I think Minister Chan Chun Sing did allude to that as well last week. And I think I can't emphasize more, reiterate again, that everyone in the ecosystem, as well as various stakeholders, particularly employers, play a very important role to ensure that everyone levels up.
If I can just add to that, so the skills training ecosystem, it's what makes it complex is, as I was saying, that there are so many variables at the trainees and itself. There is definitely need for more research to understand how the trainees' attitudes, what they think about undertaking a training, how do they see themselves as a learner. So even the interview that we did, we've quite naturally probably got those who were most enthusiastic. They wanted to talk about the program, but what about those who kind of left it midway or just did it for a month and left it? How do we capture people who are low on this kind of motivation, or for whatever reason they're unable to even undertake a training? How do we capture them, and how do their own motivations, their own circumstances link to these job outcomes? This is the biggest variable, I feel. And if at all we are able to kind of understand what are these particular vulnerabilities, what kind of support, like for some trainee, it might just be to have that kind of career coaching, counseling, and that would do all the difference for them. They have all the other information, but they just need motivation to kind of get back into the job market, enter a new field, just feel that it's okay to kind of, it's not really a fresh restart, so to say, but so maybe that kind of counseling or career coaching is what they need, and they have everything else. And from the employer side, again, for employers to be open to receiving people who can bring a variety of skill sets. So if it's career or mature workers, and they bring in a lot of experience and they bring in different kind of skill sets, and that matches with the training that they've done. So the employer should be able to view it as an asset. So it requires the employers to also kind of come midway to say that we are open to receiving mid-career and mature workers because they bring in a lot of experience, they will bring a different type of skill set to the table.
I wanted to just take on from what Dr. Srija has shared about career coaching. And here I would like to actually look at the younger workers. So if you're looking at youth who are going through ITE and coming out to work, or, in secondary education and, looking at what to do next. So maybe the coaching or the befriending starts much earlier, so that when they enter into the job market, they're also much clearer about how they can get support, what they can look at if they run into any roadblocks. And this is where the SBFF program, the Employability Fund, works very closely with the nonprofit sector to be able to provide support to those who are in the margins. So looking at training, I think it is not just about the provision of the training, but how can we get people into the training and sustain them? So the career coaching is definitely a very good suggestion. And that can come from within the employers, not as an additional outside role, but from within the employers, hiring people in the HR department as supporters, as like befrienders for those who are less skilled.
I don't know, I just wanted to weigh into what Ranga and Srija both mentioned. Totally agree. I think traditionally we have been very strong through our Employability and Employment Institute, E2I, as well as Careers Connect by the Workforce Singapore. I think we've been very strong in career counseling and coaching to support the unemployed, those being retrenched, in a way to segue back into some form of career or job. But I think increasingly those already in employment, I mean, we because of the disruptions you've seen and the various transformations you've seen in the past couple of years, I think very, very important to also look at those already in employment, and therefore the importance of not just looking at the older, more vulnerable ones, but also the younger ones as they prepare to enter the workforce. But at the same time, also to better support employers to provide this very individualized career coaching. Because traditionally, employers usually provide such coaching services to more the high potential, those that may take on leadership positions in organizations. But I think, as the whole workforce matures and develops, I think there's a greater need and imperative for us to look at career coaching and counseling at the individual level, at the company level, and also at across all segments of the hierarchy.
Thank you all for your insights on this. On a related note, there's an interesting question from our online audience. Okay, what would the panel think of going beyond a tripartite system to a quadripartite system that includes community into the conversation? Yeah, it's interesting because we have Ranga here from the non-profit sector that would share with us, how does this look like if we are going to include the community into this conversation together with the labor movement, the government, businesses, and employers.
I must say thank you for the question. That was a diagram I presented earlier. So I don't know what's the word for it, quadripartite well, movement. Definitely, I think we are living out life as a whole if we leave out the civil society or the non-profit sector, because we often feel the job is to earn money to live life and it is separate, but I really think it is very, very important that we work closely together. And when we talk about the non-profit sector, it's not only talking about low income, it's talking about all types of vulnerabilities and challenges that people may face on the ground. And that's why the examples that I provided there is so that we can really look at how we can come more closely together. So many studies have been done, surveys have been done, and we look at the voice of the people being represented in these studies. But what more can we do to be able to actually listen to those challenges that they are expressing, and having these four different stakeholders come together to look at it. I don't know what it looks like. Maybe it's already being done through various efforts, like I mentioned, like SBFF, Workwell, Beyond to some extent, and other charities. But perhaps we can put greater focus on civil society participation.
Any thoughts from Mr. Patrick Tay?
Yeah, I quite excited about this additional fourth party, but I thought that there'll be actually multiple parties. In fact, the labor movement beyond tripartism through our labor research conference last year, as well as the Singapore Labour Journal, has tried to engage our fourth big partner, which stakeholder, which is actually the Institutes of Higher Learning as well as our think tanks, which includes IPS as well, and how we can translate useful research into actionables to impact the ground and particularly workers. But I thought for partnering in the various segments, I think, in more ways than one, we are partnering in various segments. For example, like the labor movement, because we have our social enterprises as well. So the cooperatives and social enterprises are already part of our network, including the youth through our Young NTUC and NIBO. And I believe the government as well, through the People's Association Network, as well as the various ministries where there's a lot of engagement, for example, like MSF with different segments of community, particularly the not-for-profits and the civil society groups. So I think, well, there are various ways, and I think the key thing is how through these many helping hands, we can work together with a multi-stakeholder approach to confront and take on some of these challenges and issues as we move ahead.
Yeah, I just want to add, so from the study that we did, there was another survey that we had done, and we had asked all the trainees, how did they get to know about a particular training program? There's so many which are available. And most of them said, my friend suggested or my family member suggested. So there's so much of peer-to-peer kind of, you look at your friend, and if they've undergone a successful training, you would like to kind of trust them, or really you're encouraged more than just maybe going to a website and just thinking that this might be good. So if we understand this aspect, this community aspect of it, that the word of mouth about a particular training or some real positive outcomes of a particular training goes a long way in bringing more people on board to to kind of undertake more training, have a kind of positive mindset towards lifelong learning. So kind of community does need to be part of this picture if we really want to make an impact.
Yeah, could I just add on a little bit about the Institutes of Higher Learning? I think, Patrick, you touched on it. And community, if you really look at it, is a community of the study as well, right, in their schools. So ITE, for instance, is I think 20% of what we call, many of our students are in ITE. And we consider that as a tertiary qualification. And I know that within ITE, there are different departments that look at counseling, helping kids stay on track in their school and so on. But perhaps, again, we are working quite separately. So while there's career, support for those students who are coming out of ITE, maybe there needs to be a more coordinated effort within the Institute of Higher Learning and the careers they actually come out to, which is specifically the ITE and even the secondary school. So when they finish their normal tech, for instance. So this part of it, I think has got to be more actively looked at. I've spoken to counselors in schools and in ITEs, and you find that it's really a challenge for them, and they're handling it more of a social issue that the kids can't stay in school, but it's more than that, because it's actually then them becoming contributing members of society, right? How do we allow that track to be smoother for them? Because it is very real, the challenges that they face in their communities, but how can we allow this to be a natural progression? So looking at that instead of functioning separately.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, the nexus between our, IHLs, or should I say CET centers, as well as industry, we see this very, very important. Particularly important as we witness to the last 2.5 years during the pandemic, where many of the new school leavers couldn't really land into jobs. So that's where we had to mobilize industry sectors, companies, company by company, literally, to provide traineeship opportunities, to basically to cement or to allow school leavers to segue into some possible careers. So I think I can't agree more. I think this nexus, I think it's also highlighted in our PME task force report, really spot on, one of recommendations on how we can bring this bigger, better nexus between industry and training centers, as well as IHLs.
All right. Thank you, speakers. On the related note of working together, I think we all can agree that public engagements with citizens, or in this case workers, are on the rise. Increasingly, they're seen as key to achieving collective interest and collective action. So we see various representatives from NTUC today spoke about NTUC's Every Worker Matters conversations, their year-long engagements with workers. And then this morning, we have SecGen, Mr. Ng Chi Meng, and Assistant SecGen, Mr. Desmond Chu, speak about the Youth Task Force being set up by the NTUC to engage young Singaporeans in schools, and also the young labour market entrants. And also from Ms. Ranga, we now know that beyond social services and their community projects, which includes community circles, community enablers, and community fellows. Right, so we all can agree that public engagements are on the rise to enable workers to have a more active role in shaping policies and programs. I suppose I also echo the concerns of some of the online audience when they mention about worries whether or not these vulnerable workers can participate in this process, whether or not in reskilling, upskilling, career conversion, whether or not they are able to participate equally in the engagement process. So I think it's also common knowledge that workers facing job vulnerabilities tend to be the harder to reach communities, and they tend to be excluded from in the process, right? So the thing is, how can we then enable them to engage in this process? How can we ensure the diversity in the representation of workers? How can we develop the functional capabilities of workers so that they can participate fully and meaningfully in this engagement process? So perhaps I'll open the question to Patrick first, and then followed by Ranga and Shrija.
Thanks for that question. I think definitely much to share about engagement and engaging our vulnerable workers. I think particularly I would like to just point back to how the PME task force did our 1-year journey, engaging more than 10,000 professionals, managing executives. Like I said, due to the safe management measures, we had to do it both online and offline. We did various forms through online as well as, I think the face-to-face ones were particularly enlightening and endearing because it wasn't easy. Yeah, because in those focus groups, 14 to 15 of them, we have actually captured all the points that were raised during focus groups as part of the annex through a nice diagram, or should I say infographics, in their report. So it's really no holds barred. Whatever that was shared were actually transcribed onto that, and everyone endorsed it before we published it. So every participant whose views were aired and shared were actually reflected there. So some of the points shared there may sound sometimes a bit more taboo and beyond the OB markers, but really we wanted to allow an opportunity for us, both the labor movement as well as employers, to share their thoughts and their fears, anxieties. So I must say it wasn't an easy journey, because online is a bit different from face-to-face. So in those limited 15 focus groups that we had, I had a rare opportunity to engage with quite a number of disgruntled professional managers and executives as well, who really gave me all their thoughts, their challenges, and what they actually encountered when either they were terminated, laid off, or passed aside for a promotion or given a bad appraisal. So I literally, myself and my colleagues were, the fellow facilitators, we really had them really face the hard truths. And it wasn't easy, because many of them had opportunity to, it was not a small group, I would say about 15 to 20 of them, but really shared, and gave whatever they had in a very frank and honest manner. It wasn't easy, because sometimes when you do such sessions, you can be quite shocked at some of the remarks made and some of the actual scenarios that they have faced. The rejections, sometimes the comments made by prospective employers, for example. So it was really a very enlightening, as I shared, and we've tried to capture some of these points in the annex of the PME Task Force report. And if for some of you who are tuning in, who may want to have a view of some of the points that were shared, and therefore we managed to distill many of these. So, for example, a very, very good example is quite a number, particularly in their 50s, PMEs shared about the difficulty to re-enter, because previously they came for a sector where they had quite a few direct reports. When they tried to apply for a job, when they were individual contributors, I mean they were kind of like sidelined and sort of saying being discriminated against because of their age. So these some were some of the points that were raised, and some also shared that it took a longer than normal period of time to really bounce back. So that's where the point on unemployment support and like a short-term relief for those really actively looking to re-enter, but maybe perhaps need some support and leg up for the time being. So that's where we came up with that recommendation and included that as part of one of the 9 recommendations in our report, how we can better help and support some of these displaced workers or workers who are actively looking for a job but just need some leg up in the interim period. So like I said, it's not an easy journey, but we are doing a second iteration of it through the Every Worker Matters conversation. Like the very first one, this round, we are engaging further and wider, including various segments. And some of you who are tuning in who may want to participate in some of our sessions, feel free to log on to our EWMC website and sign up to be part of our various focus group sessions, which are still continuing. And we are even doing roving exhibitions as well across Singapore, so that you can provide your views, your thoughts, and your aspirations through this platform as we establish the new worker compact.
Yes, so I suppose for Ranga, perhaps I can shift the question a little bit, meaning that, okay, so inviting them, workers, to hear their views, listen to their stories, soliciting their feedback is one part, but how do we move the conversation to having a role for them in decision making and planning? How does it look like on the ground?
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, I actually attended one of the conversations held at NTUC with a family from my neighborhood. So it was a mother in her late 40s with her daughter who's 18, and we participated in the conversations. And I must say that the family came out of it, and even myself, hearing different voices was good. And the mother actually gave feedback like she was able to say whatever she wanted to say without being censored. that she felt safe enough to share it. But it was a very large conversation, right? So there were many groups focusing on different issues in that one conversation held in the middle of August. And maybe, Robin, to answer your question, I would think that bringing these conversations into the community. So there are various charities that work with employability, right? So Daughters of Tomorrow is one, there are many such. And perhaps bringing these conversations into the communities that we serve, where there is not only one focus group, but, journeying with them a little bit. So this I'm taking from my family circles example, right? So it's like a series where people who want to contribute and participate don't only attend one focus group, but they then go on to attend maybe 2 or 3 sessions, which can also be seen as somewhat of a training and skills sharing, where they then actively share their ideas or views about how they can be included in the workforce or improve their roles if they're already in the workforce. But even while I say that, I wonder whether people have time for it, because often they don't get to see the outcome of their contributions. So they are sharing their thoughts, and many people come to them to ask them about their thoughts, but they don't actually get to see the outcome. So I'm really not sure. Perhaps creating conversations for smaller group sharing among different age groups in different types of disadvantaged communities could be one way, and not making it a one-off could contribute better. Yeah. And the second thing I wanted to say is, I think while we are here at this forum discussing all the different policies and so on, the lower wage workers may not actually know very clearly what are these policies. How does it translate to their everyday lives? They only see the part where they are impacted negatively. So again, right, going back to the communities to share with them, as a result of your sharing, this has shifted somewhat, or as a result of your, these are the pathways we have in place, and not just as a presentation, but to say, is there something you would like to contribute back? So this is the inclusion part of it, right? So we found that actually people like to, we always make it a point to present back to the communities what they have presented to us as their lived experiences. So this ongoing dialogue is what we need to ensure.
Okay, thanks, Ranga. Thanks, Ranga, for sharing how we can also develop the functional capabilities of these workers so that they can participate meaningfully and fully. All right, so if I'm going to look back at the online questions post, well, this is highly top voted, in fact, to Ms. Ranga. One of the online audience posted this. They're surprised to hear that IT graduates do not find better paid employment than those who have just O-level qualifications. Yeah, what could be the problem here? That's the curiosity. Yeah, is it about the IT curriculum or about the system not identifying what the industry needs in terms of the skill set?
Actually, Irene should be commenting on this because it is from that study. And I think what has happened, especially because of the pandemic, is that people then went into the delivery services. So in this study that was done in 2020, it looked like more of the IT graduates are employed in the delivery sector. So I'm just trying to look for those factors now. I don't think it is really to do so much with the curriculum. We are in the way that the IT courses are done, it is more for employability, right? So it is not actually focusing so much on the aspirations of people, but it's looking at the employability once they come out of ITE. So I really can't comment on the ITE system, but it could be the times that we are living in right now and the higher demand for workers in particular sectors. So when it came to the type of work that people took on, it was more in the delivery area. And I really can't shed light on why it is different. I think people are just trying to make ends meet and they take what is available. So we had lots of job offers during the COVID period where it was largely about, Grab and Amazon and so on, where people just go there because they can definitely get paid, but there's not really that much of future or protection for them.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ranga, for this. Right now, I'm going to move to another topic on unemployment support. All right, so this is one of the PME's task force key recommendations. Unemployment support is being considered and put forth to the government. All right, so the question is, would that extend to some form of cash benefits for the involuntary retrenched workers? How would it look like? And does it differ from the PMEs as well as the non-PMEs?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Robin. I think That's one of the 9 recommendations. Of course, it's not been fully adopted by the government yet, but they are really seriously looking at it. It's a deeper problem or deeper issue, and which needs really a deeper dive for a variety of reasons. Because how much to give, what is enough, whether you are PME, whether you're a lower wage worker, how much should we provide as an unemployment support, and in what circumstances? Because the word involuntary could come in various ways. If you are retrenched or laid off, maybe it's quite obvious. But if you are not, but because of some circumstances, you have to leave your job beyond your control, or sometimes within your control, will that tantamount to be involuntary employment? So I think there are a lot of questions and definitions that need to be worked out. But more importantly, if you look at our PME task force recommendations, which many of the PMEs agree, I think the key thing is we want to support those who have lost their jobs to be able to re-enter the workforce and to find meaningful work. So I think whatever support that is given, which is, we hope, in a monetary way. I mean, there are already training support, training grants, and of course, coaching, career coaching, employability camps. But I think beyond that, how we can provide some monetary support as sustenance to support and help the particular unemployed person to ride this difficult wave. Because as I shared earlier, based on the manpower statistics, mature PMEs in particular, in fact, we shared beyond mature PMEs, all segments of workers, especially the matured ones, take a longer time and may need more support and help. And so this should be, the unemployment support should be framed in such a way to help them tide over that difficult period and to further encourage and motivate them. In many parts of the world, they call it active labor market policy, meaning that we want to incentivize those who are actively looking out to re-enter the workforce and to find work. Not to incentivize not working, but really to incentivize those who are actively looking for work. I think that's the desired outcome at the end of the day.
All right. Okay, thank you. Moving ahead. All right, there is a question for Dr. Srija. Is there any research or data that monitors the success rate of people who have been retrenched but managed to get back to the workforce through upskilling and reskilling? Perhaps if I could extend the question a little bit, what about those individuals that go through upskilling, reskilling to pivot their careers to a different occupation or to a different industry? What is the success rate? And of course, what do their wages look like? Is there any data or research that you could share with us on this?
So in terms of research, different studies have been done, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, MTI, had done one study where wages, but it was not, it was more on the kind of, if you're doing a particular course, what will there be difference in your wages? Not so much for training programs as such. Now, I just want to kind of highlight that how success is defined as well is different. Even trainees themselves, what they want to do after that. Is it just getting a job? Is it getting a better salary, or just moving into a new sector and then making their way up from there? So success can look quite different. So there are, research studies, but which kind of tackle a small group of people, and then, let's look at what their job outcomes were. Looking at trainee attitudes particularly. So those who were kind of keen learners, highly motivated, did they get placed earlier, or did they end up getting better pay? So there are studies of this kind all over the world, but large scale studies like this, it's mainly because it's difficult to kind of track this kind of success. Usually, just most of the surveys that I've looked at, they look at when did you find a job and did you find a job, but going fine details into that what does that success look like? There aren't many studies which do that, primarily because it's difficult to qualify that success.
Okay, all right. Moving on. All right, there's a question about the widening social capital for vulnerable groups. So is there anything more that can be done so that the reliance on social networking becomes less of a factor in the recruitment and hiring process? This question is posed to Ranga, Ms. Ranga.
I think social capital comes with social participation and inclusion. So I think providing spaces for people to contribute, so in their own communities, in their own workplaces. So in their workplace, if it is just a job and you go and you do your job and you come back and you don't meet anyone to interact with, I think that in itself reduces your social capital. So it is very, very important because most of us got our jobs because we know someone who knows someone who knows someone. So I think it is very, very important to create spaces. So again, to think of our lives as not separate, to be able to create participation is extremely important, whether it's recreational, whether it's something that is to do with improving your skills. So a lot of money is put into training. How can we create more recreational or social participation in our own community? So of course we have the PA network, and you could participate in the residence committee or the CC and so on. That is one formal way of doing it. But how else can we have people participate in their own clubs and associations in their own communities? So especially for the lower wage workers, this is a challenge because time is of essence, right? So they don't really have that much of time. So where employers can work together with their communities is to create participation within their organizations, such that even the less skilled employees in their organization can participate. This would be one way of looking at it. And in neighborhoods, how is neighborhood participation seen? Is it only once or twice a year where you come for celebrations, or is it active participation in conversations that happen there, in activities that happen in your neighborhoods?
Okay, so for Mr. Patrick Tay, I'm also curious on the note of participation. How has NTUC's public engagement evolved over time as well?
Yeah, I think we have been trying various ways, as I shared earlier, through the PME task force and now the Every Worker Matters conversations, various platforms, various ways. As you know, the definition of worker is now getting even more wider. We have freelance workers, we have those in employment, those out of employment, including younger, not so young workers, local foreign workers, as well as those preparing to enter the workforce. So I think different strokes for different folks, I think different ways to engage beyond social media, beyond online polls, and beyond focus groups. And now we have, through various ways, for example, like roving exhibitions, and really going to the heartlands of the community. Like recently, during one of the open houses in the Frontier Community Club, we had our Every Worker Matters conversations booth to be cited there to really hear from the community in the heartlands what their thoughts of the new worker compact is, what's close to their hearts, what they hope to see, which areas of policy changes which they hope to see, and what more could the labor movement as well as our tripartite partners do to partner them in that journey. So I think I must say, engagement will evolve. We have now different platforms. I remember, as we did the various engagements in 2020, we had to do them via Zoom, by Skype, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, and various platforms, even Facebook live chats, and through Insta live chats as well. So I think increasingly, we are thinking of new ways to engage and also to solicit more views on the ground. And I can't agree more. Besides soliciting views, I think important moving forward to be able to close the gap going back to those feedback providers, those where we have engaged, to let them know, for example, like the PME task force report, including some of the feedback as part of the report in the annex, which we hope to do so likewise in the Every Worker Matters conversation, and then suggest policy recommendations, and then close the loop with all our feedback providers. I think that's important because increasingly as people provide views and their thoughts and aspirations and anxieties and fears, I think we hope through the engagement process to close the loop and say, what's being done, what has been done, what may not be able to be done, so that we can be able to close the loop and have an answer to some of these views and ideas and feedback provided.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll try to squeeze in one final question before we close the session. There have been some questions to do with discrimination at work. All right. So the thing is, there's no anti-discrimination laws in Singapore. So there's one participant that mentioned that there's a sense that employers practice discrimination, and they are likely to be able to justify why they are not re-employing a senior at retirement age. And also, you see anti-discrimination when low-wage workers experience unfair treatment at the workplace. So, do our speakers here have any thoughts to share on this?
Yeah, I think I'll take that question since it's something very close to my heart as well, and something which I'm quite passionate about, this space. And well, the good news is workplace fairness and anti-discrimination is one of the big pieces or one of the suggestions in our PME Task Force report recommendations. And I'm glad to also share with our audience that we are in the midst, we have formed a tripartite committee on workplace fairness. We have engaged far and wide through various segments of the community, from HR professionals to legal practitioners, etc. And we are still in that journey. The tripartite committee, of which I'm a part of, we are actually deliberating and working out the areas, the ambit of coverage, and the very, very exacting details of this piece of legislation, which we are looking at to promulgate, something what we call the workplace fairness piece of legislation. In fact, some comfort to some of you. There's already a tripartite alliance for fair employment, fair and progressive employment practices, TAFEP for short, which is enforcing a set of tripartite guidelines called the Tripartite Guidelines on Fair Employment Practices. So in fact, even today, if you face any discriminatory hiring or practices, feel free to contact TAFEP, and we will use this tripartite guidelines in a way to steer and educate many of our employers who are really, sometimes maybe egregious. But the good news is there will be a piece of workplace fairness legislation akin to an anti-discriminatory piece of legislation, first of its kind in Singapore. You will hear more about it in the coming months, and like I said, we are hoping to have some landing points on this and work out so that, the big focus is on those really egregious, very recalcitrant practices. So I think we want to weed those out. The good thing is, in the course of this entire year, as the work group discussed and look at this issue of workplace fairness, majority of the employers in Singapore are fair and responsible, some even progressive. But however, there are still a few black sheep out there, whether it's ageism, whether it's nationality discrimination. We still see pockets of those. I mean, these are public data that's available, where Ministry of Manpower have actually taken to task some employers who have egregious practices on this front of discrimination. So look out for it. I think it's coming up. Like I said, I'm behind you in this journey as well.
Can I just pop in to say that it is also the role of employers to have a diversity and inclusion policy in place. So this may not be enforced, but it's something that we really need to look at in terms of gender, race, and so on. So I think that employers taking the lead on having a diversity and inclusion officer in their workplace, apart from the HR, and ensuring that the complaints of discrimination are heard within the organization is important as well.
Dr. Shrija, any final remarks from you on this topic?
I'll just add this, that when you think of discrimination, it really holds a lot of, at least from the interviews, I feel a lot of trainees seeing the value in training at all, because if they feel that when I reach the employer or the job front, nothing is going to matter. So this whole mindset that there will be skepticism against that, all this training will not be valuable. So having these kind of support measures would really kind of boost, give that kind of even that mental boost that, I will be judged kind of based on my skills and my qualifications and my general experience and mindset, and not based on other factors.
Thank you. All right, thank you to all three panel speakers. Well, it's important to harness the capabilities of workers to be adaptable, to be resilient, to take charge of their own careers in this fast-changing economic landscape, so such that they become employable, and be able to have great career prospects. It is important not to overlook the structural conditions such as job insecurity, low wages, wide wage gap, poor working conditions, unfair treatment at the workplace that could continue to perpetuate the inequalities that they face if not being addressed. Addressing job vulnerabilities requires structural change involving the government, the labour movement, employers or businesses to ensure decent and viable work for all, such that no individuals or no groups are being left behind. With this, I would like to bring this session to a close and convey my thanks to our online speakers, Mr. Patrick Tay, Dr. Srijanaya, Ms. Ranga, and to our online audience for joining in and contributing to our discussion today. A gentle reminder that today's video will be available on the online platform for 2 weeks if you wish to view it again. This panel is the last of the 6 online sessions that have been held over 2 days, last Thursday and today. Up next, we have the in-person conference on the 16th of January. This will be a fully physical conference where we will continue to discuss how can we balance the aspirations of different groups of Singaporeans and revitalise our social compact as the future of work descends upon us. We look forward to seeing you there. With this, I will end today's session. Good afternoon and goodbye.